Back on. Hi, Tanya.
Okay, we have a quorum. It is 4 o'clock, so I am calling the meeting to order. The first thing is the consent agenda. Anybody have any comments on the minutes? Or a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt.
Second. Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, thank you. The next meeting is October 14th. Council update.
So Rick came and gave a very good presentation to council the other night at the meeting, and we didn't have as much as we often do on our agendas when these annual reports come forward. So I thought we were able to have a good discussion and to go into more depth than we often are able to in those annual updates. So Rick did a great job, and I think we set the stage nicely to make sure that council knows what the commission's working on and sort of knows on some level what to expect to have come before it at a later date. Rick also put in the request for a study session for each of the topical areas on the commission, and there's been a conversation going on electronically since then. But we'll be working to get those study sessions on as they are needed over the course of the next year. We just know that that's not going to be in the very near term as the council grapples with the general fund issues. But I've asked Rick to let me know, and I will know just from doing the work on the commission when this commission needs to be back in front of the council, and we'll do our best to get that onto their agenda or onto a study session. I think that's it. I don't know that there's anything else climate related to report on. Yes, Ray.
I just saw the video this morning. It looked like in the last 3 minutes, there was an assignment for the Climate Policy Commission coming back to us in terms of the nuclear free zone.
Yes, there was. I knew I was forgetting something. Thank you. So what council has asked is for the Climate Policy Commission to review the materials that were brought forward by a group of concerned citizens. They're interested in having Ashland lift its nuclear free zone ordinance that was put in place in 1982 to acknowledge they're coming at it from a climate standpoint, and they want to sort of get rid of that designation so that nuclear is something that can be thought of as an option. Given the climate connection that they made, it made the most sense to ask this commission if it would give us a recommendation back to council regarding that request. It was passed by the voters in 1982, so it would require a vote by the electorate to remove it. But council could put it on an election if it thought there was a good reason to. So council is simply asking the commission to look into it and to provide a recommendation back. And we can get you the information that the citizens brought forward, the group of folks brought forward.
Right, so my proposal is that we wait for the information to come to us, and at some future meeting, we'll take it up. Ray?
Yeah, I just have one other comment. I know, Tanya, you got asked if EPA has nuclear in their profile.
Mm-hmm.
It does look like 10 to 15% comes from the Columbia Generating Station in Washington.
Oh, okay.
BPA.
I didn't think that we had any in the mix, but I was not wanting to answer because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, not to prolong the conversation about this per se, but is the nuclear free zone about location of a nuclear power plant in within the footprint of Ashland, or is it about using nuclear power?
I was hoping to defer all that until we take this up at a later date.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so if there are no other questions for Tanya, let's move on to staff update.
Sure. I think I'll keep it pretty short. The biggest staff update, of course, is Elizabeth is moving on to greener pastures. And that is definitely a big loss for the administration in my estimation. And more practically, it's going to change how we run these meetings a little bit. So until we have a replacement, I'm going to do my best to take some action minutes here at the meeting, and I will do my best to multitask here. So I think beyond that, programs are doing fairly well. And gosh, I think we're in very much a recalibration mode with everybody having left and having staff been shuffled around. So right now I'm kind of circling the wagons and trying to figure out who's going to do which work. So more to come on that topic later. Do you have a question, Bob?
Yeah, I think I'm supposed to be doing the action items this meeting. I think I volunteered for last time, so I'll do that.
Yeah, well, when we get to old business, I thought we'd take this up. I wanted to get onto the presentation as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Okay, so are you done, Stu?
That's all I'm going to say today, unless there's any specific questions.
I'm not seeing any hands, so I'd like to move on. Are there other announcements from commissioners? I'm not sure who had his hand up first. Gary?
It does matter. There's the Land Conservation and Development Commission is continuing to proceed with their rulemaking. There's an upcoming meeting on the 15th, and then a listening session on the 25th of October that we may want to sit in on. I'll distribute notices of those to the commission as I receive them.
Okay, Bob?
Yes, Rick, I can brief you or the commission on work that we've begun on the home energy score program. There's not an item on the agenda, but I don't know if you want it here as under other amendments or under wrap up or some other section, wherever you want to put it. You can defer it if you'd like to. You can defer it to wrap up if you'd like in order to.
Yes, actually, I
Get out your
already
budget.
wanted to bring that up during the wrap up.
Great.
Jeff?
As most of you already know, my wife and I are leaving Ashland in a couple months, and I'll be resigning from the commission effective tomorrow.
Well, I'm very sad to see you go.
Indeed.
Let's see, are there any other commissioner announcements? If not, let's, I don't think there's any representatives of other commissions. I have a few things to acknowledge in public forum. Lori Kaplan sent something in with a list of webinars, comments to City Council, and upcoming climate survey. Ellen Journay, appeal for actions to strengthen the Oregon DEQ climate protection program. And there was a contact form submitted several weeks ago from Louise Shawcott that tonight at 7, SOCAN is having an Ashland Collaborative Conservation, what successful forest restoration can teach us about climate action, with Susan Jane Brown, staff attorney for the Western Environmental Law Center. Okay, so that's public forum. I think we're ready for the presentation.
Just
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ray.
on Alan's public forum. There's a link to a SOCAN website that makes it very easy to get into the details that he's asking about, and I think it's important that we try to give some input to the DEQ.
Okay. Anything else? Can you bring the other folks in, please, Stu?
Well, so folks I'm bringing in, it's going to disconnect for a second and look like you got kicked out, but just hang in there. Okay, Tom, Blake, and John, I think you should be in here.
So I'll give a quick introduction for these guys here from Northwest Requirements Utilities. We got a couple of champions and highly regarded in public power world. NRU is a trade organization representing 55 public power utilities, and John will probably correct me that my numbers are off, but they're in 7 states and represent about 25% of BPA's tier 1 sales. Pretty high level overview that won't even come close to describing all they do, but they really advocate on behalf of the members with analysis and legal analysis of all BPA policies and financial decisions to make sure that nobody's pulling a fast one or taking advantage of public power utilities. John, the CEO, executive director of NRU, has over 26 years of experience in public power, and a lot of it with a utility in Washington, and I can't remember which one it was, John, I'm sorry. And Blake has over 20 years of experience and a lot of expertise in resource planning, resource acquisitions, and BPA policy. And I'll let them fill you in on all the parts I messed up or left out. Glad you guys are here.
Thanks for having us. Blake, I'll let you go first if you want to add anything about yourself.
Sure. Well, first, thanks everyone for your time this evening. Glad to be here and glad to help out in any way we can. My name is Blake Weathers. Have worked at NRU, or Northwest Requirements Utilities, for about 9 years. And my focus is primarily on non-federal resources and kind of getting outside of the BPA bubble and looking at different options for our membership, and then also transmission issues.
Thanks, Blake. Yeah, and Tom, you did a fantastic job introducing NRU, probably better than I do on a lot of cases. But I think in addition to the trade, we don't get as well known, as Blake said, that we do have a division, as it were, that procures and delivers non-federal power, and we do it at a pretty rapidly growing scale. And so this assessment fits right in our wheelhouse for you folks. And as Blake said, we're happy to help out. Our plan today is for us to talk around 30 minutes. We coordinated this with Stu. I think it might work best if we get through to the end before we answer questions. But if we use a lot of acronyms and a lot of words that are pretty common to us, but they may not be to you guys. So I also don't want to go too far through this thing and have somebody not know what we're talking about. So please do interrupt, but we give you a lot of information and bring it to some conclusions at the end. And so if that's okay with Tom and the commission. All right, we'll get started. As you know, some time ago, Tom approached NRU and NRU Power Services, which is that procurement and delivery arm that I talked about, to ask if we could help objectively analyze what the complexity and costs would be for the city of Ashland to transition away from a BPA product and become carbon free through other generation or supply sources. Blake said it really well. We're happy to support Tom and the commission in this assessment and appreciate the opportunity to present tonight our findings to you and answer questions. If I am going to share my screen, because you can't do this without a PowerPoint. All right, can everyone see my screen? It should say replacing BPA power with a carbon-free alternative. No?
We can, there it is. Yeah, it just came up.
Fantastic. All right. Carbon-free or carbon neutral are often interpreted in a multitude of ways. The range of interpretations that we considered is depicted in the graphic on the right of this page. And you'll notice the graphic runs from what we call 100% carbon-free all the way down to what's typically referred to as carbon neutral. And what we call 100% carbon-free in our industry is where end users are literally being supplied only by carbon-free power. That means you're operating your own balancing authority and only trading with similar balancing authorities, frankly, which we're not aware of any. The next step down is where all ancillary services, voltage control, firming, shaping, operating reserves are supplied with zero carbon resources. Rather than read all of them, I'll go to the bottom, which is carbon neutral, which I think everyone will understand. That's where annual energy needs are supplied with zero carbon power, and then offsets of some type. And if you think of Washington's CETA law, where in 2030 they require 80% carbon free, but then allow some kind of offsets, renewable energy credits, projects that mitigate carbon, those are things called offsets. For this assessment, we chose the START option, which is one step up from the bottom. And we defined it as annual energy needs supplied with 100% zero carbon power. And no offsets. We chose this because it most accurately represents an alternative to Bonneville. And as we went through this analysis, we wanted to make it as comparable as possible. Just as a qualifier, keep in mind the differences between each option are really technical. They get down in the weeds in a hurry, and they're based on considerations related to how the bulk electric system truly functions versus what you might hear in the regulatory environment or what you might say on paper. And a good example is you can build enough solar to serve your load, but no matter what you do, that solar won't generate at night. And so you have to support it with some other resource. And that could, depending on what that resource is, it could fall in different boxes on this chart. With that, I am gonna pass it off to Blake to talk through the analysis.
Sure. Thanks, John. Yeah, so what we're ultimately teeing up here is an analysis that looks at a handful of non-carbon emitting resources and kind of get to the bottom from a cost perspective and then a fuel mix perspective as well too, when you compare that to Bonneville and what types of resources or carbon or non-carbon emitting resources are in their resource stack. So, you know, as John kind of alluded to, we get pretty, and you know, down in the analytics, get wonky real fast. And the slides may kind of get into some of those details. I'll try to keep it high level and make sure it's not over the top in jargon and industry speak. But I did want to start with some of the basic assumptions that went into our analysis. And one that's really important to note is in order to make this analysis, we assumed a flat block load profile. Basically, you've got to serve a certain amount of load all the time at a particular amount. And this is actually a very friendly assumption towards using variable resources. Because we know, as you've probably seen the City of Ashland's load profile, it looks like a wave and it's not a flat line. But when you're using variable resources, it's actually easier on a planning basis and more cost effective if you're meeting that flat block. So that's, if you have to make an assumption about what your load is, this is definitely more friendly to variable resources. So just wanted to point that out, you know, in full disclosure there. Second point is, I think one of your takeaways from this presentation will be there's more that meets the eye in terms of costs. You know, if you see a power purchase agreement from a solar project, or, you know, even in your rates from Bonneville, there's a lot of underlying costs that drive that, including on the transmission side of things. So it's not just that PPA. And so we used an assumption that in all cases, you're going to have to pay some transmission ancillary costs and use Bonneville's transmission rates to kind of get at those numbers. And so it's important to note that most of those costs, or many of those costs, are agnostic to resource choice. They kind of apply kind of generally across the board. So those are some key high-level assumptions we wanted to just lay out on the front end. And then now we'll kind of dive into the resources that we were looking at. So John, next slide, please. Thank you. So as we mentioned earlier, part of our function at NRU is to provide non-federal resource options for our membership. Just to, as a point of reference, for example, we're serving on average this coming year, 2022, we're serving just under 80 megawatts of our members' load, and the rest mostly served by Bonneville. And so we're constantly out in the market, not only transacting, for market power, where it's maybe an unspecified resource, but actively investigating specific generating resources. For example, we had one of our municipalities in the state of Washington recently start taking output from a solar and battery storage project just this past year. So much of what you're going to hear today isn't just kind of like academic studies. It's actually where we're going out, investigating these resources, getting term sheets, and then actively transacting on those. And currently just kind of the range of resources we're looking at, which you'll see later on in this presentation, are solar, small hydro, and then small modular reactors or small modular nuclear reactor projects. And so we've been pulling from that experience and really populating this with the best and latest and greatest information that we have. Next slide, John. Okay, so this ties back to that assumption or that statement I made back on slide 3 about the additional costs associated that stretch beyond when you sign a power purchase agreement, and what those those additional costs you have to realize when integrating resources. So the term we use is resource support services. That's code for Bonneville's firming and shaping product, basically taking both variable resources and dispatchable, like a small modular nuclear reactor or small hydro, and what does it take to basically shape that resource into your load profile or to meet that flat block in our analysis. And so we account for that using Bonneville's as the default kind of cost or assumption here. Bottom line, as you'll see later on, and sorry for the spoiler alert, is the more variability in the resource, the more costs, the more dispatchable, or basically having more control or less variability, the less cost there. And this also includes for events like unforced outages. What if the resource goes down, well, on an unplanned basis, and transmission curtailments? What if you, in the event the resource was, say, over in the state of Idaho or something like that, what if the transmission is curtailed and there's a non-delivery event there to your load? So that really encompasses all those various aspects. So let's go ahead and hop to the next slide, John, and just kind of cut to the chase here. So the projects we included here was looking at a solar project without battery, solar project with battery, a small modular nuclear reactor, and then wanted to compare that to Bonneville's now current, or for it'll be current in about a month, the BP22 or fiscal year 22 rates with Bonneville. So again, these quotes are from actual PPA term sheets that that have crossed our desk. And then, so again, it's actual real pricing you could achieve rather than us kind of doing an academic cut at it. For the RSS costs, or that firming and shaping costs, those are actually based on quotes that we've gotten from Bonneville. We give them all our data, and they run the numbers and get us back that forecast. For the record, we, if anything, just for due diligence, we also get firming and shaping quotes from third parties. And those quotes, in some cases, have been higher than Bonneville's. In any case, I think the bottom line there is validated the quotes we've gotten from Bonneville that, you know, if you went to market to get those related services, they would be comparable to what you're seeing from Bonneville. So, you know, you've got that table in front of you looking at project cost, RSS cost, and then total cost. Project cost would be effectively what that PPA cost would look like from the developer, the builder of that resource. Then the RSS cost captures those firming and shaping costs that I described at a high level. And then, of course, the total cost is the sum of those parts. I would just a quick nit, I can't help myself. The small modular reactor, they just came out with an update that the new updated price is now $58. So that's the price target for that specific project over in Idaho. So that's that. So you can add $3 to the bottom line there, and that's fresh off the presses. Just some observations, kind of getting to the bottom line here. You know, obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that those three non-carbon emitting resources are fairly comparable in terms of bottom line costs. What drives that cost is a little bit different. So solar, over the years, the price of PPAs, price of panels, driving that cost have really been coming off and dropping over the last couple of years. And so that price, you know, you can get that in the low 40s. That's achievable today. But where you kind of get dinged is because of the variability, trying to fit that to meet your load. That's where the costs really kind of add up. And so meanwhile, the small modular reactor has a higher ticket price on the PPA, but because that type of nuclear project has a very high capacity factor. I mean, you can run that thing full bore, you can count on it basically 24/7, 365. But they can also ramp it, meaning it's dispatchable and toggle that up and down. The firming and shaping costs are very low. And I would say even that $4 on there is probably very conservative in the sense that it's probably a little too high. So next observation or takeaway is, of course, comparing that to your now almost in a month current rates with Bonneville in the, you know, mid to high $30 range. So when you compare these three types of resources to Bonneville, you're looking to pay about 70% more. Now, later on in the presentation, we'll then kind of circle back and talk about BPA's fuel mix and comparing Bonneville to these non-carbon emitting resources. The last slide for me before I turn it back to John for a little bit is just to give you a sense of in terms of kind of what's baked into your Bonneville costs, you know, that $37 or $36 and change number, and trying to make a fair comparison. Again, we'll circle back to fuel mix in a second, but you know, so these are the big ticket line items on your Bonneville bill: that composite charge, non-slice, demand, load shaping. Basically, that is all code and jargon for Bonneville following your load. Basically, what that jargon translates into is Bonneville is going to meet 100% of your energy needs if that's what you want. And that's in that composite charge, and you could throw the non-slice in there as well too. Demand charge means they're going to meet your peak at no matter what it is. They have that obligation, and so you don't have to plan to meet your peak if you're, you know, you've got that cold winter snap and the like. And then the load shaping charge is what the charges and credits you get as your load fluctuates, and they're toggling their system to meet your load. So that's all baked into that $37 number there. So with that, I'll turn it back to John. Thanks.
Thanks, Blake. And so what we've talked about is the scenario where we're at today, where prices are today. I think it'd be informative to look, where is it going to go in the future? And Blake mentioned it, that solar prices have been coming off. And so we wanted to look at what other prices that are in this comparison might look like going forward. For the last 2 years, we've been working on structuring the next long-term contract with BPA for our members. As part of that effort, we undertook a very comprehensive analysis to forecast future BPA rates. The modeling consisted of almost 1,000 scenarios and almost 3,000 games. And so where you do runs to combine the different scenarios. As Blake said, we don't want to get too wonky, so we'll go to what's probably relevant to you guys, and that's the results below. The graph on the left shows that the most likely BPA tier 1 rate, which is what we've been talking about throughout this presentation, in 2029 is going to be $36.70 or $37 per megawatt hour. So roughly equivalent to where we're at today. And if you think about legacy costs and where the hydro's at, how long it's been running, consistent investment over time, it should probably make sense that price is fairly stable. Graph on the right shows the most likely tier 1 rate in 2039 is just under $40 per megawatt hour. And that's that same kind of scenario about long life assets, consistent investment in place. There's not an R&D curve that belongs there, or a expansion curve if you're looking at economics. Of course, there are uncertainties. These are forecasts, it's modeling. You guys all know that it's just like weather. When you forecast out, you get uncertainties in there. And we wanted to share what we think are notable uncertainties that could move this modeling. I would say, and I don't want to go backwards too far, but we took that analysis out all the way to 2045, and the highest cost we saw for Bonneville under any scenario was in the mid $40 range. We didn't include that in the presentation, but I think it's relevant to share. Going back to this slide, some of the unknowns or some of the variables that could move Bonneville and could in fact move it lower. Residential exchange, which is it's an equity mechanism that's built into the Power Act, and it compares Bonneville's cost or public power rates against those of investor-owned utilities. And there's an equity mechanism where Bonneville actually pays the investor owns. Those delta between those rates have come much narrower lately. So I think there's a strong likelihood residential exchange costs could get lower, which would actually ultimately lower Bonneville's rate, that $37 we've been talking about. BPA has demonstrated their ability to manage their costs really well. The last several rate periods have been flat in terms of increases, and in fact was a decrease in what Blake calls BP 22, over jargon you, but that's fiscal year 22. We're going to see a wholesale rate decrease. Future renegotiation of the Canadian treaty, this is called the Columbia River Treaty. Every year, as was agreed upon nearly 50 years ago when the dams were built in Canada to help manage the Columbia River system, Bonneville makes payments to the Canadians for managing water, and every year annually. If we could get that renegotiated and modernized is really the goal, those costs could come down significantly. And that's over $100 million annually on average. So there's reasons to be excited about the future. Of course, there's always the other side of that coin. What could happen that could maybe impact Bonneville negatively? Fish and environmental policies are always out there. And in fact, they're a pretty fair chunk, about 25% of Bonneville's wholesale costs today. It's called borrowing authority because Bonneville's a federal agency. Their access to capital is limited statutorily. And if our current effort to increase that borrowing authority doesn't work out, there could be some access to capital issues that could cause them to go outside the treasury and maybe not borrow at as good a rates as they have now. And then actually market saturation. And so Bonneville sells hourly and annually surplus energy into the market, and that the funds from that, revenues from that, are credited to your tier 1 rates and drive that price lower. If the market itself is repressed or depressed, those revenues could decrease and thus impact Bonneville's credit and raise your rates. Those are some scenarios. I would say that we tested these, we included them. We went so far as to include a proxy for breaching of the 4 lower Snake River dams. We tried to think extremely broadly in those scenarios and include them in our analysis. We included high market scenarios, and what we present to you, and you notice on that chart, is that 50th percentile. So it's not way out on the ends of probability, it's the most likely. With that, I'll turn it back to Blake to talk a little bit about the other resources and their future outlook.
Yeah, so thanks, John. We'll segue back a little bit to kind of a focus on solar. I kind of beat myself to the punch on this slide. It's important to, discuss the trajectory of solar PPAs is definitely going downward. As panel technology gets better or cheaper, it's important to note that. But what's also important to note is that when you think about in terms of actually using a solar resource to follow load or basically have enough of it to serve load at night, it has to be paired with a battery. Just as an anecdote, we've like I said earlier, we've helped one of our other municipality customer or members integrate a solar and battery storage project. But by no means was that battery big enough to be able to serve all of their load at night. And so when you ask the question of, okay, what does it actually cost to have a solar plus battery storage project that can truly follow load or meet your load when you need it? That's where the arithmetic or the calculus on the cost benefit analysis, it just isn't there yet. So you can see on that graph for yourself, this is in kWh. We typically talk in megawatt hours and in other places in this presentation. But the long and short of it, you were still looking, even if you could find a battery that was big enough to actually kind of follow load or be a full resource, if you will, in 2017, you were still looking at $100 per megawatt hour. And that doesn't include many of the ancillary costs we were talking about earlier. So, it's really not quite there yet. That said, solar, as I said before, just a solar only PPA is coming down. One thing that I meant to mention earlier as well too is when you, if you were using a solar PPA and you do have to find firming and shaping, one of the key requirements, if you're truly trying to go carbon free and you're using a third party to do that for you, you have to make sure that their upstream resources are carbon free as well too. It's been our experiences. We've gotten quotes for like our Washington members dealing with the carbon legislation there. That can often drive the cost of that up or kind of inflate that. So next slide, John. Okay, so just a quick snippet as well on small modular reactor projects, just to kind of give you the span there. I think the bottom line, so we've been focused on, and I probably should have said this a little bit more earlier in terms of kind of setting some context, but the project we've really been focused on is with an outfit called UAMPS, or it's the Utah Municipality Power Group. And they have been trying to develop the small modular reactor project and making very good headway. It would be located over in the state of Idaho. You've probably heard of NuScale, who also has offices in Corvallis, Oregon, so just north of you guys. And so that is the project that if one's going to get legs, it's probably that one. And so they've been quoting that $58 price, or their price target, and that's what we've been working from. But then this slide also gives you kind of the range of pricing that's been batted about as other folks have looked at SMR technology as well too, basically anywhere from 46 to $90, just to give you kind of the full disclosure or full view of what that resource might look like in terms of cost. Again, a lot of upside in that resource in terms of the dispatchability of it. And maybe for another day, if that was something you're truly interested, then we could talk about, okay, how do you get it from Idaho to your load in terms of transmission and those issues as well too. But that's probably another hour in and of itself. So next slide, John. Okay, so trying to circle this back now. Maybe the reason why we're here in terms of talking about carbon-free options. To me, in terms of making the comparison to solar, or making the comparison from Bonneville to solar and small nukes, and looking at those price points, you got to kind of circle this back to carbon as well too. So to me, this is a pretty compelling slide in terms of looking at BPA's fuel mix. So the bottom line here is you're looking at, if your sole supplier is Bonneville, you're roughly, depending on the year, looking at about a 96% carbon-free fuel mix. So roughly, depending on the year, ranging from about 2.5 to, I'll just call it 5% of carbon-emitting resources. So you may ask, okay, so where's that carbon coming from? So Bonneville, in its specified fuel mix, its hydro projects, CGS, or Columbia Generating Station, the nuclear project in, I'll call it Central Washington. They have some wind PPAs in their fuel mix, et cetera. What that small percentage represents is the unspecified resources. So Bonneville, when the loads they're obligated to serve exceed the output of all those resources, primarily the hydro and CGS, when it's exceeded, Bonneville has to go to market and go out and make market purchases that are deemed to be unspecified. It's not that those are technically guaranteed to be carbon emitting resources. It's that you never know kind of the day ahead. So they're kind of assigned a ratio based on that unspecified designation, where they calculate all the resources in the region, and you'll have coal or natural gas that make up a small percentage of that unspecified, and then they apply that arithmetic to this fuel mix. So that's where it comes from. It comes from Bonneville making purchases in the market when they are deficit, and that's how you get to those values. But again, bottom line here is, while Bonneville is not 100%, like looking at a solar project, they are pretty dang close. So with that, I will turn it back to John.
Thanks. And this has probably had a spoiler alert too, is we've tried to convey that it's not as simple as plugging some solar panels into distribution lines and delivering it. There's a lot of parts and pieces that come together to actually make the grid reliable. And I think that's a key piece. Some of the things that Bonneville includes in that tier 1 rate, that $37 to $40, we'll call it, they include scheduling of all your power deliveries from those multitude of sources that Blake just finished mentioning. Transmission service for transfer loads, that's loads, again, that are outside or not directly connected to Ashland in this case. Energy loss returns, that's the losses that occur on the wires themselves. BPA agent services, education and analysis. You've got a really huge machine over there, and they do a lot of number crunching and looking at things and handling some environmental compliances, a number of issues that are rolled up into that rate that you don't have to deal with. And then a big one, support for EE, energy efficiency acquisition. They staff that, they do the engineering behind the numbers. They do program design, funding, and market transformation, which is NEIA, the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, which has been a big player in really light bulbs, heat pump water heaters. So that brings us to the conclusion. And I don't think I need to say much here. I'll try and frame it in a little different way. I think the graph was really clear. With looking into the future at BPA's rates and some of the other resources Blake was talking about, we really don't see rate parity between a non-BPA renewable scenario and BPA until at least 2040. And that's based on our best knowledge today. Keep in mind, this still assumes reliance on BPA to provide that RSS or shaping and firming. And that means having power when the load is there. And that goes back to reliability. It's not clear when or if it would ever be cost competitive to supply those services. And Blake said it extremely well, that batteries just aren't there. You can get the total megawatts, but to get the, we'll call it 12 hours of darkness covered in the extreme cold or an extreme heat event, it's just not there. And in my past, we didn't talk about it. I actually was fortunate enough to go to Kauai for work and see one of their really large solar and battery installs. And it covered over 100 acres and still didn't serve but a fraction of their load. And so there's a number of issues we didn't talk about, technically, geographically, like that. And so I guess we'd stop there. That's the extent of our analysis. We feel really confident. It took us longer, and I've told Tom over time, hey, we want to get this right. We want to make sure we're giving you, and I use the word objective in the start. We are BPA advocates, but we do have that non-federal. So we feel like we're bringing you a really objective analysis with considerations from all aspects. I'll stop screen sharing and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so I know I have a number of questions, but I'd like to defer to the other commissioners if you want to go first. Ray?
Yeah, I have two questions for you. Thank you for your presentation. It's really nice to see how BP compares to future options. One of them has to do with being bearish on BP capacity or costs in the future. I saw you had environmental, but I didn't really see effects of climate change. I'm kind of thinking of what's happening to the hydro in California this year down in Oroville and Shasta Dam. And the second one had to do with the SMR nuclear reactors. When do you think, I get the feeling that these aren't proven yet and that there's some timeline needed for them to be proven? And would there be any additional timeline needed to consider that option?
Sure.
I'll take the first one, and I think it's a really good question. And I actually, when I use the example of the lower Snake dams, I cringed a little because it's really not what we did to model or to account for that climate change, Ray, is we actually assumed a loss of 1,000 average megawatts of generation across the system in any given year. And it wasn't specifically related to those 4 dams. It was just, hey, if the water's not there or a resource goes away, by assuming that 1,000 average megawatts, you cover a multitude of scenarios. But what you do is you consider what happens in the scenario of a significant loss of generating resources, where that's fuel related, which is water, in your scenario of climate change, or asset related. And so it covers a really broad range of scenarios where the federal system might decrease in capacity, average energy capacity, dramatically year over year.
Yeah, and I'll take the SMR question, but I'll just add a little bit more on onto John's statement there. We're kind of even seeing it in real time with this current summer. We saw in Q3, so summer pricing was double and even triple than what it's been in years past, in large part because we had let's see if I get this right, the second driest La Nina year since 1960. I might be 1965, but I think you get the point. And so while there's less water, they push up market prices. If BPA can manage that water better, they're selling into that hot market, suppressing, bringing in more sales, keeping that price down. So it sounds counterintuitive, but they kind of actually in some ways benefit, at least in keeping the rates down in even in a, climate change right in front of our face, right? So on your question about the SMR technology, absolutely, it is a new technology. They have not worked out the kinks. That said, I've sat through some of the, not just the presentations where they're trying to market to you, but actually where they're dealing with regulators and meetings in Corvallis where, the rigor and testing they're going through on the front end is incredible in terms of all the hoops they have to jump through with the NRC and getting that going. So yes, is there a risk there? Absolutely. But I would say I've never seen the level of due diligence and hoops that they have to jump through to get that resource off the ground. Hence why, and we probably glazed over this, but in the presentation it said, that resource wouldn't come online till about 2028. And they've been working on that for, at least 5 years. So yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. So the 50% cost prediction did include some degrade, assuming variability in the power source being hydro.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Blake, didn't I hear something recently about NuScale having cleared enough hurdles that they can start selling, or UMAPs is starting to subscribe some of that output though? They're kind of to that point.
Yeah, and they have already, they first went in-house, meaning all their Utah members subscribing that, and now they're starting to reach out to across the Northwest, including our group. I can't say whom, or I probably shouldn't even know, but I know they're reaching out to other public utilities across the Northwest, Oregon and Washington, et cetera. So.
Jeff?
Ashland, I assume, is kind of a remote outpost for BPA. Has NRU looked at reliability in terms of natural disasters, wildfires, earthquakes, and also cyber attacks?
So I'll take the first stab at that, John, if you want.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, and so just so you know, we were just we some of our members are even further out than Ashland. You guys are actually pretty close to us, relatively speaking, all the way out to northern Nevada. And so I think what we do spend a lot of time on in that regard is transmission events. If there is transmission curtailments from these resources, how is that handled? What are the 9 times out of 10, it usually comes down to financial implications, and how are your deliveries arranged? Because if there's an event where a line's coming down, from a natural disaster or a forest fire, and your load's going to get shed, that's going to happen. But what we spend a lot of time is making sure that our members are protected in the event that their loads are curtailed financially, that they're still made whole and have all the risks covered, and keep those financial risks to a minimum. So I know that maybe not to get right at your question, but I'm happy to follow up if you have more details you want to add. So.
Well, I have a follow-up on that to maybe refine that answer just a little bit.
Sure.
One of the big issues that I think Jeff was getting at is resiliency, and I haven't yet heard you talk about how you are going to price resiliency into your estimates.
I think that's a pretty good segue into what I was going to add. As a trade association who represents Ashland and others in dealings with Bonneville, which ultimately often come down to economics, but really economics is the output of the conversations. And NRU has taken a very deliberate posture with Bonneville in terms of recurring investment. Well, whether that's cyber related, they have a strong, Davie and Bonneville has what they call a grid mod initiative where they've updated their systems. They've put in better cyber protections. I'll go back to, we have taken a posture of not pounding the table for the very absolute lowest price. We have said our goal, Bonneville, is reliable and affordable power. Inherent in that conversation is investments in cyber protection, redundant transmission lines, other pieces that provide resiliency. Bonneville, by the nature of their system, when you think of the federal system and the dams and the nuclear plant, has a tremendous diversity of locations. And they have a fuel source that's pretty hard to interrupt. You guys have talked about climate change. And when you couple that with prudent investments and work on the system, that's, in our opinion, a really strong approach to resiliency. And I want to be super careful on how I approach this. I would say and I came from, so the utility I worked for was Inland Power and Light up in Washington State, public power, it's a co-op. When we looked at resiliency and resources, if you invest in a large solar system, and if you don't locate it in multiple areas, if you put it in one spot, because it's cheaper for transmission, it's better for the batteries, it's easier construction, land clearing, maybe you want to build it on a landfill, you actually expose yourself to what they call single shaft or single source risk. Somebody comes out there and burns it up, shoots it up, attacks it, you have a similar resiliency exposure or a failure exposure than you might have through the transmission system. And so I don't want to come across as pushing back on what you're saying, but each approach to supply side comes with its own set of risks.
Tonya?
Thanks. I may be an outlier here, but I think whenever I've thought about this situation with Bonneville and the contract that we have, I haven't really been looking at replacing Bonneville. I've been looking much more at how can the city have more flexibility in being able to produce more of its own local power. And for a couple of reasons. And we talked on the resilience side of things. And for me, that's, we have we run our own wastewater facility. We run our own water treatment plant. We have our own emergency operations center. And right now we can do 1 megawatt and 200 kilowatt systems, but we would like to, we really do need the flexibility to really look at that from a resilient standpoint, especially since, we're just getting more and more information about the likelihood of a serious earthquake that could very, very significantly alter those transmission elements, for a period of time, especially if you're going all the way across Bonneville's system. It's not like, a couple of years ago, we had a problem with Avista Utilities and they literally flew people in on jets to fix our town, but we were the only town having a problem at that point. And so a week and a half later, we were back in business. When I look at what's happening with climate, this is what it seems to me, is that in the next 10 to 15 years, we are going to electrify rapidly. And to me, what that means is greater demand for electricity. Locally, we're pushing that. I know, just in terms of meeting our climate needs, we have to do that. And so when I think about that additional demand coming into the system, I wonder why we can't have more flexibility in terms of developing our own renewable resources up to some point in our contract that's bigger than 1 megawatt and 200 kilowatt systems. Because I sort of look at it as the bigger energy budget. And that's, Bonneville's, got what I consider to be, very clean power. But we also have resources down here that we could be making more of our own energy. And that's got to just be a good thing. So what can happen with the contract so that we can actually develop more resources locally?
You want to start, Blake? You want to start from the non-federal as,
Yeah, sure.
as the non-federal expert?
Sure. Well, so first let me say, I personally think you're thinking about this the right way. In that if I were in your shoes, I would be highly interested in maintaining what we call that load following relationship with Bonneville, where you've got, they're the provider of last resort and they've got an obligation to meet all, at the end of the day, they're going to serve your load. And more importantly, the lights will stay on unless we have that big earthquake, right? And so what's interesting, or kind of to your point about those flexibilities, is believe it or not, we're already starting to negotiate that next contract with Bonneville, as you know.
We know.
And so here we are talking about post 2028, and we're in 2021, and we started talking about this a year ago. And that is one of the hallmarks of our ask or our negotiation strategy with Bonneville, is to get more flexibility. I can tell you, you know what you're talking about, because you know your numbers, that 200 kW limit, for example. And so that is actually something we're pressing on Bonneville, because as you get over those thresholds you described, it's red tape and cost. And so how do we eliminate that, or sticking you with a take or pay obligation, even though you've got a great resource in your backyard? And so how do we unwind some of that red tape and cost? And so I would say, while the conversations right now are non-binding, we made a pitch to go to 5 megawatts as a threshold for that. Will that stick? I don't know, but at least Bonneville so far has been receptive to the conversation, is doing analytics on it, because they're sitting back and going, okay, if we sell less to Ashland, what does that mean for the rest of our customer base? And so far they've been pretty intellectually honest in that analysis, I think. And that's kind of where I see that headed. So I hope that's kind of addressing your question about, and how we're kind of teeing that up with Bonneville. So,
Well,
John,
I'd like to amplify that just a little bit,
Sure.
because the big uncertainty for a group like us is we have absolutely no idea when it's going to go from, well, we're kind of talking about it, to, yeah, there's a commitment here, because
Sure.
if we wait until 2025, then we have absolutely no recourse.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. And don't quote me on quote me on this, but in terms of that 2025 date, that's when you would be signing. The goal would be to have this framework laid out, and these types of maybe policy questions addressed by probably no later than 2023. So then give you 2 years before you sign, 5 years before it's like, okay, if we're serious about having a community solar or whatever project you're interested in, you've got 5 years to start putting that together. You may tell me that's not enough time, or you may say that's plenty of time. So,
Well, that's absolutely not plenty of time. I think we're already under the gun.
Okay.
We've looked at other cities that have gone through this. It's taken them 5 or 10 years to figure it out.
Sure. Yeah. Fair enough.
And if I can follow up, Rick.
Yeah, please.
So I guess I'm not sure that I accept the idea that having more flexibility would mean that they would sell less power to Ashland.
Sure.
Right? Because I really think that this demand increase is coming with we're already, Ashland's already going gangbusters on electric cars, and we're switching out, we're fuel switching, we're doing all that sort of thing. And I get that Bonneville needs a structure in a contract that allows them to operate, right? We have no interest, I think, at least I have no interest in having contracts a general contract that puts Bonneville at risk of not being able to match up our load. We have a good reason to want them to stay in business and doing well.
Absolutely.
But what I wonder is in this contracting times, I understand that there's sort of a baseline of energy that's coming in from somewhere else that doesn't get put into the contract. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, okay, is the right thing to do then to just, in 26, 27, and 28, when we don't care about the take or pay, when it's a tight enough timeline that it doesn't matter, do we just throw up every single piece of renewable energy we can get up and lock in a different baseline? Is there maneuverability in the contract to do something like that?
The short answer is yes. But it's really, really complicated. Yeah, so we need a lot more time to kind of walk through that. But there are some options there. I'll just kind of give you a snippet. It gets down to like the treatment of what they call existing or new resources and how Bonneville works that into their arithmetic. So there are some avenues there. We need another hour to and charts and graphs to kind of get you there. But I think the takeaway is there are options to start to make that move or kind of prepare for that. Again, though, you can kind of hear the hesitation in my voice. I'd want to get a little bit further along in those negotiations with Bonneville before we start talking about that as being kind of like a final deal. So
it'd be kind of just a designated resource, wouldn't it, Blake? But you don't want to tip all the cards before you see what Bonneville's going to give us.
Right, exactly. Bottom line is that is the bottom line. And just one other point on your statement about Bonneville not losing sales or something to that effect. Yeah, it's just so you know, I totally agree with you. That was kind of more of their position, and we are certainly pushing back on that on several different fronts. But yeah, so
yeah, I was going to reinforce that that Bonneville came out with an initial analysis where we had requested a 5 megawatt threshold, if you will, and pushed back on what basically citing loss of revenue. And we kind of called them on the carpet and said, well, you need to show that. And when we look at the demand for all the preference customers together and the amount of interest, and so our group, along with other groups, have said point blank to Bonneville, we all have a strong interest in getting more of Bonneville. And so that greatly reduces the risk of what you might call stranded or pricing risk of selling it surplus into a volatile market. There's a lot more work to do there. And I don't want to step too far out of the weeds or too deep, but I wanted to read our board, which Tom is a part of, created some principles to work through these contracts on. And the third one says the post-2028 contract and rate structure must allow preference customers to be responsive to changes in market conditions, regulatory conditions, and the needs of end users. This includes the ability to easily and cost effectively use non-federal resources, which is what you're talking about, including distributed energy resources. And so for us, Blake's right in being a little hesitant because we aren't far enough in this thing. And just because Bonneville returns or comes back to our initial presentations on what that might look like for you guys, our members, it doesn't mean the conversation's over. And I know the timing is tough for resource development, but our goal is to get a framework that doesn't say, well, what's right for Ashland, but what's right for everybody, and also protects Ashland. And so keep that in mind, is that where you guys have these strong needs and we support them, we have to make sure, I'll just use the utility I came from, which is roughly about 8 times the size of Ashland. You don't want a utility like that to make a decision or implement something where you guys are holding the bag. And so that's why these things take longer than it seems really simple. The 200 kW is like, well, just change it. Well, what does that mean across 140 customers, and what are the intended consequences? And I will share, not in this role, but I could tell you 7 or 8 years ago, I was pounding the table saying the 200 kW limit's ridiculous. So you have a partner in that assertion.
Yeah, I think I saw Bob raise his hand.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is a really great conversation, very informative. On the same point, really, and recognizing that, you know, the contract is the same for all of Bonneville's customers. It's not just it's not specific to Ashland. The specific, there are some very specific annexes that talk about, you know, what we've got as our, you know, excluded assets and everything. But it's the same for all of them, and it's so and our interests are aligned with all of the other Bonneville customers as well. But it's a specific form of a take or pay contract. I'm wondering, is there something that we can learn from other take or pay contracts with other generating generators, you know, in this country or elsewhere? I mean, there are other federal generators as well. I suppose Tennessee Valley Authority follows some, you know, some other kinds of practices, and there may be others that I'm, you know, not aware of course. And then worldwide, there are other take or pay forms that may allow a little bit more flexibility in that. I'm wondering where there's anything there. That's the first part. The second part really goes back to the transmission question, is how we should be thinking about transmission in all of this. You didn't talk about transmission costs when you compared the two, and I tend to, you know, I agree with Tanya's assessment that, you know, it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about getting more flexibility. Getting more flexibility, though, also adds other kinds of transmission costs as well. And as we add other kinds of generation facilities, you know, it's one thing to have a small generating facility here of under 200 kilowatts right here in Ashland. You know, you kind of connect to the transformer and there you go. But if we're really talking about doing some more bigger ones, 1 megawatt, you know, maybe the biggest we could fit here in Ashland. If we want to go up to 3 or 4, we're going to be having to build, you know, something that's a little bit farther away. And we're going to have to, you know, we're going to be getting it from a generator that, you know, you're also going to have to be being able to plug into the transmission line. So how do we think about that and the costs of transmission as well? Sorry to go on a little bit.
That's quite all right. John, which one do you want to take?
I'll take the flexibility from others and what can we learn on take or pay. You take the transmission. I think the short answer is yes. I'm not sure that TVA and WAPEG and others look exactly like BPA because of the Northwest Power Act. That said, I think the fundamental take or pay along with flexibility is exactly what we've been talking about. And it lands with, how do we, as you guys have said, not undermine BPA or create risk across customer classes, but allow that flexibility? Historically, that really hasn't been on the table. And so it's up to us to define what that looks like. And I don't think there's boundaries, Bob. I don't think anybody's saying it has to fit in this box. In fact, we've taught, looks like we lost Blake. Oh no, you're there, Blake. So you moved around. We've spent considerable amount of time with Bonneville and other public power entities talking about, hey, don't start here. We're going to start, you guys can't see my hands, but let's start with extremely broad or unlimited sideboards and then prove where it won't work. And I think that's been widely embraced, at least by others in public power. Bonneville's a federal machine, and so they start wide and they start coming narrow, and then we push them back out. And you know, that's the nature of any negotiation, is that we keep working on them, and that's why we offered up that 5 megawatt threshold as an example. Is, hey, don't think about what we have today or what Ashland can think of today. Let's think about what the art of the possible and create this framework that accommodates it. So it's not a super specific answer like, oh, TVA has this clause on page 83 that we can plunk in there. But I think it's a mindset of saying, well, we recognize that what we have isn't perfect, doesn't fit everyone. How can we, the word that's used is future proof. It's overused, but that's the idea, is how do we look far enough in advance and build that flexibility into it?
Yeah, so on the transmission costs question, great question. And so the bottom line right now, so the good news is about like the transmission contract you have with Bonneville is it's based on your load amount and not the resource. So it's an agnostic. So if you move to a resource like the solar storage project I was talking about earlier in Tri-Cities of Washington, it's going to be no different there in terms of the cost. Now, if you're talking about like that, the carbon free or the SMR project that UAMPS is working on over in Idaho, you are going to have to pay for those transmission legs to get that resource across to your load. You know, to give just an idea of the magnitude of costs, I think just kind of a rule of thumb for you to use if you were seriously interested in that project. For right now, I would just say $5 adder. That's or maybe 5 to 10 if you're being a little bit more conservative. So you can add that in. And so that's kind of how I would think about that. One thing to remember though for Ashland is, you know, you sit in Pacific Course service territory. So when these deliveries are made, they're also over Pacific Course system as well too. Currently, you know, if your Bonneville deliveries, and if you were using that non-federal resource or solar project in Washington, that's all taken care of in your Bonneville rate. They pay for that delivery service across Pacificor. That is also something we're going to be talking about in these post-2028 contract negotiations, and making sure that is considered as well too, to basically keep the same deal you have in place right now. So I hope that ends. I didn't know if there was anything else in that transmission question you had that I didn't address, but happy to if there's.
And I would just clarify, when Blake says $5, he means per megawatt hour.
Yeah, okay, sorry. That's not kWh.
Okay, if no one else has another question, I have one more, and we're getting close to running out of time. So just procedurally, is it reasonable for us to sort of go back and think about this and then send some more questions to you folks? Or how should that work? Tom?
Just for ease of transfer, and if you want to send them to me, and then because I meet with these guys pretty regular, and that way we can we don't lose them in the shuffle.
Okay, that sounds quite reasonable. So the last thing that I wanted to ask right now, I have many more, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to belabor them. The analysis you did sounds like you're mostly dealing with large generators that are remote from Ashland. You know, we've referred obliquely to distributed energy resources and discussed that a little bit, but it seems like your analysis didn't really anticipate a large amount of that. And that leads to the other half of the question, which is how much would you expect things to shift if you're dealing with these large remote generators, if you were to combine both wind and solar rather than just solar? Because I would expect wind to complement solar quite a bit and perhaps reduce the shaping costs.
Yeah, so you're correct in that this analysis looked at what I would call utility scale solar projects. The solar and battery storage, just so you know, just to give a point of reference, was about 3 megawatts. And also we've looked at anywhere from 20 up to 50 megawatt nameplate facilities. And I would say, you know, on a kWh basis or megawatt hour basis, those generally are cheaper than a smaller distributed, just purely economies of scale. And of course, you would have maybe more costs and interconnection if you have to build a substation or upgrade a substation to accommodate those. But I think by and large, those are going to be cheaper. All that said, in terms of if the push generally is to more community-based projects or distributed energy resources, I really think that ties back to Tanya's questions of, you know, about the thresholds and being able to integrate those fairly easily, avoid red tape and additional costs. And, you know, could potentially be some upside with those types of projects, especially if that's just where the society is going. You may not have a choice in that. So.
And if I could add on to that, and I agree, and I'm actually a big fan. I think solutions to problems are rarely one big miracle item, and I think distributed resources really are a significant part of it. You do have to start dealing with your distribution system limitations, and I'm no engineer, and so I'm going to put that out there right now, is that when distributed resources look great so long as you can pick where you place them on your facilities. But when and I don't know the city of Ashland, I've never looked at a circuit map for you guys, but I know from my own experience, oftentimes somebody wants to hit that 199 or 200 kW and they're out on a radial feed, and you start getting reverse flows, and there's all these other issues. And so it's like I say with everything comes with its own set. And I think it's going to be some of this utility scale solar. It's going to be some distributed resources. It's going to be some in-home batteries. There's going to be a lot of ways to talk about these transitions that we know they're coming. We just don't exactly see clearly how they're going to look when we get there. And that goes back to, how do we get that framework that lets you all do what works for your community? As a city, maybe you're more dense, maybe you can accommodate more distributed resources, where some of our more rural members really struggle with that. And so we're trying to find that medium for everybody.
Tanya?
Thank you. And this has been a great conversation. One of the things I wonder about, because of the length of time of these contracts, it's part of what actually scares me, is knowing how far we have to get on our climate goals in the space of this next contract. We really have to get all the way there in the space of this next contract. And so I wonder if there is a way to set up the contracts such that, you know, with Bonneville having a finite resource in its production, where as demand in Ashland and other communities grows because of fuel switching and the other work that's being done, potentially in migration is also something to be looked at, that as we can show a consistently higher demand, we can bring online renewable energy to support it above whatever that sort of baseline is. Because otherwise, I actually think that Bonneville could be in a situation where they have to now go find other sources and bring them in to supply communities, because they won't let the communities supply themselves for that difference, for that gap. So I wonder, over such a long period of time, would it be possible to structure the contracts in such a way that as demand becomes clear, it actually has grown, and there is a differential, that the communities could then aim at that differential for bringing on renewable energy?
We can do that now pretty much. If we exceed our tier 1 allocations, we can meet anything exceeding that with any resource we want in our current contracts.
But we can't still go past the 200.
No,
and
if
1
we're
megawatt,
above our tier 1 allocation threshold, then all that stuff's off the table. But we've never exceeded our tier 1 threshold. But if we are exceeding it, we can meet meet that demand with any resource we so choose.
But the tier 1 is set so high above kind of where we might get that.
Actually,
we don't
we're
ever get to
right
gap.
up against it,
Yeah.
we have been.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Right as we come to a new contract.
And the other piece of your question, Tanya, and I'm sure John can back this up probably with more data, but as far as contract lengths, that's another one of the big topics that's been bantered around through all the groups is are these next contracts going to be structured with the same term lengths, or can we shorten them, lengthen them? I think BPA is statutorily restricted as far as length, but there is, how long they can be, but nothing says they can't be shorter.
Yeah. And,
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
And I would just add, I think Tom, fantastic, well done. I would just add that in really just in the last couple of weeks, where Bonneville has said they have a strong preference for a 20-year contract. We've written some pretty specific comments that said, well, when you tell us what you're willing to give us in our basket of needs, then we'll tell you how long of a contract we're willing to agree to. And so when you talk about flexibility and some of the things that you guys want, we all want, that's the horse trading. That's our term, horse trading, is, well, if you want a 20-year deal, then as Tanya says, here's what we need on our side of the ledger. I'm an accountant by formal training. Here's what we need to sign that 20-year deal. And so I would just reiterate, Blake said it a couple of times, we're pretty hesitant to say where it's going, because we're right in the thick of it. Everyone's kind of laid out what they want. And now we're into, well, who gets what's Bonneville willing to do? How do we leverage Bonneville beyond maybe what they're initially willing to do? And that's the time that Rick kind of said, well, we don't have that kind of time. And I wish I could speed things up, but these things often do take longer than we'd wish. And we do want to get it right this time. It's amazing what transpired between signing the current regional dialogue and implementing it. There was significant market force changes where we probably would have done some things differently. And so we're also working off of that lesson.
Okay, if there's not any final short questions, I think we need to bring it to a close. I very much appreciate you both coming and talking to us. It's been enlightening. I think I'm going to have to play the recording over again and sort of think about it all.
Sure.
And I imagine we're going to send some more questions to you through Tom. So thanks again.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Tom, as well.
Okay, let's see, where are we here? Okay, now we're on old business. The first thing is normally the action items volunteer. I've had some conversation with Stu, and he was talking about that at the beginning of the meeting. Historically, we have had fairly extensive minutes written by Elizabeth, and I had thought that was required, but now apparently it can be very short, not much more than the volunteer has typically been doing. Is that right, Stu?
I don't know exactly what the minimum legal requirement is, but if we do a more abbreviated minutes, that's still fine, especially if we have the recording as a reference.
Okay, so what you had sent to me earlier is that we need to record decisions, action items, and assignments. And I don't think that's a whole lot bigger than what we've been asking the volunteers to do. And so what I would like, given that Stu is going to be taking this on, is to just eliminate having people volunteers and just have Stu be doing it at every meeting. And I think we'll be wasting less human time in that fashion. So if there's no disagreement with that, I'd just like to have Stu do that. Tanya?
Just checking in to see if it's a requirement that it be a staff person that tracks these things. I don't know, Stu, what has come down from the administration inside the city. Do they want you to do it as the staff member, or could somebody else do it?
Yeah, I haven't gotten any real guidance from admin as far as what needs to happen, but I think we can pretty well, I mean, I need to offer the final version. If somebody is inclined to do a draft and then give it to me, that would be fine. But I'm happy to kind of keep it at least for the next meeting or two and see how it goes. I know that they're looking for a temp for Elizabeth. What's not clear to me is if that temp will be available to this commission. So,
Yeah, I understand that there's some discussions around job descriptions and that sort of thing going on. So we should probably plan to do our own minutes for a while. And I just, mindful of just the incredible staffing crunch, I wonder if we could have a commissioner take that on for at least the next couple of months and see if we can't, get the draft over to Stu so that he just has to review it and send it on versus drafting it himself.
Bob?
really, sorry, if you guys
Sorry.
want to do that, that would be fine. I also have to do a bunch of other stuff, so it won't spare me completely, but that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna talk about Tanya's suggestion, and we can certainly have a conversation about that. But the point I wanted to make is the minutes, we don't ever see the minutes until the new packet comes out for the next meeting. Whereas the action items that we've been sending out, they come out in the next day or two. So it's really useful, whatever we end up doing, to have something that goes out in the next day or two so that it just triggers our memory of what we're supposed to be doing over the next month.
Yeah, so I think that was the discussion that Stu and I had earlier today, and the notion would be to come out immediately.
Probably, let's say if someone else is taking the notes and then sends them to me, it'd probably be the day after. I would aspire to get them out on Friday.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would like to have Stu do this a time or two and see how it goes. If it becomes too burdensome for him, then we'll have to figure something else out. Tanya?
I'll volunteer to take them and draft them up and hand them over to Stu, if that's okay with the group. Not today, of course, because I haven't been doing it today.
I mean, the other option is to have somebody each meeting take it on, like we have been doing. But if you really want to do it, Tanya, that's okay. You could try it for a while.
I don't really want to do it.
I didn't think so.
But but I, what I'm in conversation after conversation as at the council of the very severe situation we are in with our staff, and I am absolutely happy to do it for several months. For the next 3 months, I'm happy to take those minutes and get them over to Stu, because I think we need to be lifting off wherever we can in these next several months.
What do you think, Stu?
I'm highly deferential to what you all decide to settle on.
Okay, well, I have made my opinion known. There's a contrary opinion, so I need to hear from the rest of you. We're just going to be wasting time on this.
How about this? I'll do it this time, and we can all have a think about it until the next meeting and make another decision then. Does that work?
Well, I'm obviously fine with that. What about you, Tanya?
Sure. I mean, like I said, I haven't been taking the notes today, so I couldn't do them today anyway. But I think if we had a simple template, this would be an easy way to take something off of staff. So if we want to talk about it at the next meeting, that would be great.
Okay. Commissioner recruitment. There has been an application, and I'm waiting for the process to unfold. I have already spoken to the candidate. I'm not sure where it is in the process right now. I believe the next step is for the mayor to interview. So let's see. So while we're talking about number of commissioners, I want to thank Jeff again for service. We're going to have to elect a new vice chair. Currently thinking we should do that in October. I am probably not going to be available in November. So it's very important to get it done in October. It's possible I could come online and listen, but I don't think I can leave the meeting. In theory, I'm going to be away. Stu has also pointed out that The November meeting is currently on Veterans Day. And so we need to figure out what we're going to do about that, because at least Stu's not working that day. So I think for now, that's a heads up. And in October, we also need to resolve that. So when you come to the October meeting, please have what dates you are available that are near that date in November. Okay, like to move on to formal planning. Ray, do you have anything?
Yeah, just a few things. You know, I was away for 3.5 weeks, so I didn't send you an update, but I'll do that for our October meeting. So verbally, I did confirm that the TAP master plan and the stormwater is moved out to next year, probably sometime around springtime, Scott thought. The other thing is the TSP is still fluid in terms of when that update is going to start. I think partially due to some optional funding from ODOT that may be available. I think we'll get an update in November from the chair and from Public Works on where that is going. And then the last thing was, you know, Chris had been following the housing capacity analysis, and that got adopted by the council 8/17. And it's going into the, as an addendum to the comprehensive plan for element 6 housing. I know that there's a follow-up called the housing production strategies. So I'm assuming we're going to want to continue to follow that and how it aligns with what we want to do for our building initiative. And so I'm going to add that under comprehensive plan that we'll be following that. And we'll talk with Chris to see if he's going to stay engaged with that or we need somebody else.
Yeah, I believe he said that he was going to, but it wouldn't hurt to follow up again.
Okay, and that's it.
Okay, any questions? Let's move on then. The CPC update from 2 days ago. I have a few observations, but given my participation, I'm hoping other people were able to be more thoughtful about watching what was going on. So what I heard is that the council is supportive of the work that CPC is doing, that there are no climate deniers on council. It does, there's a lot on council's plate, however. And so I also heard that we need to focus on actionable policy rather than sort of vague support statements. And I can't imagine that any of us would disagree with that. It's unclear how much council time will be devoted specifically to CPC. I have since reached out, as Tanya was saying earlier, I reached out to the mayor, and that sparked a conversation about when would be a study session with council that would be devoted to CPC, and how many, and that kind of thing. And so I just want to let you know that that conversation is ongoing. And during the wrap up, I would have some more ideas and specifics about that. But as far as observing what happened at the meeting, there were comments of approval for the commissions to coordinate themselves. So I am continuing to spend time on amplifying that along with other commission chairs and with Lori Kaplan, who's been very helpful in being a neutral third party, helping those conversations going along. There was concern expressed about fossil gas in existing buildings and by restaurants, meaning that would be a difficult thing to take care of. And so coming back to the council with background information about how other cities can deal with it and that kind of thing would be useful. So before I forget, since that meeting, I went and reviewed the CCOC annual update with council, and it turns out that they had made more or less exactly the same request of council to have some study time And so part of the commission coordination will be trying to reduce the burden on council by bringing together a reasonably unified set of study session requests. So is there anything else that other people wanted to comment upon who had the chance to see the meeting? Bob?
Yeah, Rick, I thought you did a terrific job presenting the CPC report, and then even more so the back and forth of the Q&A. I think there was the Q&A was actually very, very rich. There is one question that I think we need to put some analytics to, which is this sense in the community that it's cheaper to heat somebody's house with natural gas than it is to heat it with a efficient electric equipment heat pump. Those comparisons are tricky to make, obviously, because they're measured in different kinds of things, kilowatt hours versus therms, and trying to get that specifically. But if we can find some examples and really build some analytics around that and present that to the community, I think that whether it'll be believed or not, because I think that's a very deeply ingrained belief that people have kind of taken on board. And we even heard it from the Avista representative that, being able to provide cheap gas to heat a poor woman's home is like a deeply felt value of Avista. So I think that is something that we need to kind of address and get some analytics and see whether it's true or not. My sense is it's not true, but I think we should, especially with our very, very cheap electricity rates and the fact that gas rates are already going up as well. Avista has announced a rate increase, but I think we do need to put some analytics around it. But again, just kudos on your presentation. Really good.
Thank you. Yeah, and I totally agree with the analytics. And it's actually the kind of thing I'd rather be doing. It's deep technical work. Okay, Gary? I can't hear you. Oops, no video.
Yeah, well,
There
a
you are.
message come up. Anyway, just to compliment you, Rick, on the job that you did, and also to follow up on Bob's comment, given that those analytics do need to happen, how are we as a commission going to organize that project and carry it forth? I think that that's one of those that we're going to have to assume the responsibility for, and it's on us as the commission members to do it. At least I presume that's the case, unless Stu, you've got other ready analyses that you've run across that you can just share out.
Well, I don't have any ready analyses, but I think we have a whole quiver of policy ideas that we're ready to take to the next level and then have to get them in front of council. So I think, seeing how much calendar time we can get will be some measure of their interest, I think, although we acknowledge that there's some other problems we need to deal with also.
Yeah, and following up on what you said, Gary, commissioners are going to need to put nose to grindstone a bit on this. I don't think we should ignore the community members that already know an awful lot about this. The person that most springs to mind is Ben Scott, and he has been part of a group that Lori once again has been leading. And so I think it would be best for the commission as well as everybody else to coordinate those efforts and not reinvent wheels. Tanya?
Yes, I think Bob's point is well taken, and I certainly heard that in the conversation as well. And what it tells me is that this just has to be a major underpinning of the whole fossil gas conversation. And you spoke to it, Rick, when you talked about the importance of equity and the importance of making sure that these benefits are available to, particularly to people who don't have the money to front those costs. And I think that that just has to be woven into everything that we bring back in front of the council, and in the work of helping the community understand that these climate programs and policies that we're bringing forward are not going to make the situation worse for those who are struggling the most in this community. And so I think we have to weave that all the way through everything that we do. What I would also say is that, yes, the council is going to be focused, entirely on the general fund for the most part for the next several months. But this commission and the other commissions should keep going with developing what they want to bring forward. And when we have something ready, I will do my very best to get it the time that it needs in front of the council. So let's keep plugging, let's keep building and developing what we want to see happen. And then we will, again, weave that into the council work plan as it ripens.
Yeah, I think as with regard to the initiatives that you listed, Rick, we should think hard about what we want to bring forward and when we might do it as a first step for each of those initiatives. And obviously it's got to be one that we need council help on. So I think one of the hard things for the timeline is going to be how much public input do we need, or are there things we can bring forward before we get all that public input?
Yes, and that prioritization discussion is, I'm hoping to save enough time in the wrap up to actually go deeper into that tonight. So if there's not commentary about what you observed at the meeting as opposed to what we're going to do, we can move on. The next thing, Urban Land Use and Transportation SEEP Implementation Plan. Gary?
Yeah. So as Ray reported, the TSP is in limbo, ostensibly because of funding. The council was enthusiastic, or at least the mayor and the city manager were enthusiastic about finding third-party funding for that. And so consequently, that research and negotiation will have to transpire before the city can proceed with the update. I think it's unknown when that will happen. There was a suggestion that there's some possibility that existing grantees of ODOT's funds might not be able to pull projects together and thereby free up dollars for Ashland to start. That's possible, but probably unlikely. And if not that, then it's probably next spring, summer, maybe, before that project begins. And in that light, trying to move our land use, urban and transportation implementation plan forward seems to me to be a lower priority for two reasons. One, the Land Conservation and Development Commission will be adopting a updated transportation and housing rule in March of 2022. And that rule will have substantial impact on our work, in that it will dictate outcomes that heretofore haven't been required in the transportation planning rule. As an example, since 1991, the transportation planning rule has required local governments to develop safe and convenient bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Well, that hasn't happened despite the rule's requirement. The Department of Land Conservation and Development understands that, and this rule will, in fact, I think, require that outcome as a first priority in terms of project development and funding. Additionally, the rule will require explicit vehicle mile of travel reductions, which are SEEP calls for and the transportation plan actually calls for. So I think we're going to see progress going forward through that rulemaking process. Ergo, we probably should wait on the finalization of that rule to formulate our implementation plan so we can reflect the requirements of that rule in our work. Further, the purpose of having the implementation plan, in my estimation, or at least the primary purpose, is to provide, as a commission, guidance to the Transportation Commission in the development of the transportation plan. If the transportation plan is moved out 6 months or more, that gives us, I think, ample time to formulate our recommendation, and that in that way empower our representative on the Citizen Advisory Committee to articulate the commission's preferences as contrasted to what the individual representative of the commission, or commission that is, might think. I think it's important for us to be able to speak with one voice and to have that voice supported by the entire commission. I think the implementation plan can do that for us. And so consequently, I think phasing that to coincide with the development of the plan and the approval of the rule makes a lot of sense. So in closing, I'm just asking in large part for the commission's concurrence that that approach makes sense, and we can schedule that refinement of that draft plan over the next 6 or so months without adversely affecting our workload.
Well, I certainly agree with it. If there's anybody that is in disagreement, please speak up now. One thing I want to check with you, Gary, is I had seen something that suggested that probably the longest the funding would be pushed is 9 months, and it might be earlier, but I did hear 9 months.
Yeah, that puts it to early summer, I guess. So, you know, I think that'll work for our planning purposes. I would be pretty confident that once we get the final rule from the Land Conservation and Development Commission, we can make some refinements in the implementation plan, then bring that back to the commission for review and further discussion. Simultaneously with that, I will integrate the comments of the Conservation Climate Outreach Commission, who did provide comments to us on a schedule consistent with which we asked for. So I think that'll be an important part of our next draft.
Okay.
The one thing that I would like to close on, I had distributed to the commission members a survey, basically giving you an opportunity or asking for your input on the priority of the various implementation strategies that are currently included in the plan. I would very much appreciate hearing back from those of you who haven't had an opportunity to weigh in on that topic. Basically, it's a way for me to understand how you see the issues and what you think are the most important steps to be taken over the short and the long term. So if you can get to that, that would be great. I think that was distributed about 2 weeks ago by email.
Yeah, I've got it, and it's still in my pending box, so I will attempt to get back to you in the next few weeks.
Thank you. No, you know, there's no urgency. Fit it into your personal schedule as you see fit, but yes, that would be great.
Okay, anything else on this topic?
Not for me.
Okay.
particular decision I should write down for this? Besides hold off on that?
I think that summarizes it.
Okay. All right,
Right,
thanks.
well, and an action item for people to look at the email that Gary sent. That was the other thing I heard. Okay, so you're done, Gary? We're gonna move on?
Yes, yep.
Okay, thank you. So the next thing on the agenda is the Avista October presentation preparation. I put that on the agenda. If only I could find my mouse. Yeah. Because I wanted to talk a little bit about the approach we're taking to listening to Avista and whether we want to send them questions in advance or not. And so I want to speak a little bit to that in the hopes of prompting some conversation. Avista has put out a number of public statements. They use things like it's clean, and they use other words that need definition to know what they actually mean. In their press release, they said Avista has set a new aspirational natural gas goal of being carbon neutral by 2045, with a near-term goal of 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So that's a quote from their press release. It seems obvious to me that they are limiting their emission scope for them to have any hope of doing this. And so I would like to ensure that the representative is going to speak to those scope statements and rather than just letting it slide. So that's the type of question that I would like to include perhaps in a list that will give to Stu, who can pass it on to the representative prior to the meeting. So there's that. And then I'd like to read something that I had prepared for other purposes. Again, just to spark a conversation if needed. So my expectation is that the representative is going to come and provide us with real information. That if he's only presenting generic talking points, the gas industry has developed to defend their business, many of which I find disingenuous, then I expect the commission's not going to be very interested in continuing to provide them a forum for that kind of thing. If he's going to answer the kind of question that I just posed, then that's clearly a beneficial use of our time, in my view. So my personal hope is that over time we can find a way for Avista to be a partner in either providing an alternative product that is consistent with Ashland's climate goals, or some way Avista can be part of an orderly shutdown of the gas network, possibly by creating opportunities for Avista to leverage its customer relationships to create a substitute business. My current expectation is the latter is the least cost solution to achieving Ashland's climate goals, but the technical capability exists to provide the former. Which it will be is largely a matter of cost, schedule, and Avista's business choices. There are obvious regulatory and business model issues which may take years to overcome for them to create a substitute business, but I believe the advantages are large, both for Avista and Ashland community members. And I believe that Stu has already communicated that the commission is primarily interested in near-term solutions rather than aspirational goals. And I'm hoping that he's going to be forthcoming about all that and describe some of the PUC rulemaking that's involved and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's my preamble. If there's commentary or specific questions that ought to be proposed hopefully in the light of either what I've put forward or in the consensus that's developed tonight, then that's what I'm hoping to accomplish for this agenda item. Jeff?
I think we can assume and hope that the Avista rep watches the video for this meeting and clearly understands that we're looking for a constructive long-term pathway to phase out natural gas in the long term. I should say fossil gas in Ashland.
So are you saying, Jeff, he should have a heads up? That's what we're looking for, because we want to avoid the discussion Rick said could happen.
Yes, and perhaps we could let him know ahead of time that he should watch this, at least the tail end of this video, to get a sense of our expectations.
I think it might be better just to send it to him. The other thing is, I was wondering if Avista is going to, well, we'll see when they lay out a plan we're asking for, right? How they become carbon neutral. Whether they're going to have a state-by-state solution or they have a common solution. I got a feeling they're laying things out state by state based on how much regulation is within each state, making them do certain things.
They are also an electric utility, so it's possible that they would be phasing out coal generation, and the focus is not on fossil gas. That's possible as well.
That was kind of my reading of the press release, was that it was in some ways really focused on their electric side, and presumably there is a realistic expectation that they can actually achieve their goals on the electric side. It's the natural fossil gas side that seems intractable.
Well, the quote that I made from their press release, excuse me, specifically said natural gas. And that's what led to my question about what scope they're talking about. Bob?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and they've also, several of us participated in that long-term planning exercise that was open. So they would talk very specifically about gas as well, methane, including ways of generating their own methane from non-fossil sources. Do we know, Stu, do we know who is going to be coming? Is it Steve, Vincent, and others, or just Steve, Vincent? I guess.
Yeah, well, so far the invitation is only to Steve. My sense is that if we offer a list of questions that maybe is beyond him, he might pull someone else in. I don't know that for a fact, but that seems to be pretty standard.
Yeah, that's where I was going. I mean, I would favor a list of questions rather than, I think it's fine to suggest that the representatives watch the video, but I think a list of questions, just because we're trying to get to some clarity, so to be as clear as we can be, and I don't know how we do that in the time remaining today or between now and the meeting. But yeah, and that might then trigger a decision within Avista of who all will participate in the meeting as well. So it'd be useful to have, if we're wanting a more technical discussion, it would be useful to have something prepared for it, Steve or whoever.
Well, unfortunately, with not another meeting between now and then, my proposal was to have a less than quorum group create those questions.
I like that.
I agree. I think the questions will give us the best chance of having a successful conversation. And them too.
Okay. Are there any objections to that course of action?
Yep.
Okay. I certainly want to participate in that. So by my reading of the rules, we can have up to 3 more people. So I'd like to hear for volunteers now. Ray?
Well, actually, Jeff is now out.
Yeah, no,
Well, Jeff could do it as not a, he's not a member.
Well, Jeff did provide us
Jeff
with
can be at
an
Jeff
extensive
can be
list of questions.
a
so-
non-commissioner, advisor.
well, that's true. He wouldn't even count anymore.
He wouldn't count.
You had to know that we were going to try at least, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are the experts, but I'll do what I can to help you as well. I don't have a whole lot to add on this more technical subject.
Okay, that's fine. I think the three of us can do it. Obviously, it's open if anybody else decides they want to participate.
I'll
Yes,
help.
Stu?
I'll join in, of course.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I always intend to copy you. So
How much time? are
I'm
we
not trying
planning
to
on
ignore
giving
you.
them?
I'm just always assuming that you're there.
I'm always here.
Rick, how much time are we planning for this discussion?
You mean to
Presentation.
generate the questions?
No, in October. On the
Oh,
meeting schedule.
I had allocated an hour.
Okay,
I feel when we have a guest here, we need to take full advantage of the time. If we happen not to need it, so much the better. We always have other things to do.
Yeah, and I intend to go back and look at he was here just a year ago, so it's courteous as well to look and see what the conversation was at that point. So I'll do that.
Great. Okay. Getting a little, so I feel like we've reached a conclusion. And I don't see any point in belaboring it more right now, unless somebody else has a comment they want to write. Okay. But I do want to comment that there are resources outside this commission that we should tap as part of generating this list of questions. There's Brian Stewart from Electrify Everything Electrify Now, whatever it is. I don't remember the name of the organization. And there's also the folks from Eugene, the Something Collaborative. Anyway, there's lots of resources for asking the right questions. Okay, so let's move on to wrap up.
A quick thing about the question list. I don't know if we obviously don't want to send them a list of 100 questions.
No.
We'll work to whatever the subgroup will work to curate that down to a manageable amount. And
Yes, I'm hoping to keep them fairly broad, but specific to things that Navista has already said.
And
Yeah.
at a time, and what's our aim for transmitting those questions? A week before, 2 weeks before? What are you trying for?
I'd say
I
it's
would
more
hope.
oh, sorry, Rick.
No, go ahead, please do.
I think the more leeway we give them, the better answers we'll get. So
Yeah, I was just looking at my own schedule, and so my hope would be by the end of next week, we have already had an email thread well underway, and maybe even done.
Okay.
So it depends on what the schedules of Ray and Stu and Bob are. As far as when we
well,
might
we've
finish.
already started an email thread, so we can pick up from there.
Yeah,
And I think that thread had gotten to the point where we agreed that we want to come off as we want to work with Avista, and we hope that they want to work with us in partnership. And what we really want, they already have their plan. So give us the details of your plan so we can see how it fits with our goals.
right. Just so that's a very broad thing, and I would think he would already be getting ready to tell us that. And so the emphasis would be on supporting the plan. How much is this going to cost at what point in time? Those sorts of things are key and tend to be glossed over.
Right.
Okay, anything else on that? Yeah, and then I'd like to move on to wrap up. The first question I have, and I'm not necessarily anticipating an answer tonight, but since Jeff is not going to be here, we're down significantly in our capabilities. And so we probably need to review the goals that we just sent to council and rethink whether we're going to continue to sign up for all that, or just right up front, we need to decide that here are the things we're not going to try to do. The only caveat to that is whether we actually get additional commissioners brought on board. As I mentioned, there's somebody in the process already, but we definitely need more bandwidth.
Yeah, it's going to take about 3 people to replace Jeff.
Well, we have 3 openings. Now, as part of this wrap-up section, I also want to talk about the look ahead. I have been sending an updated version of that when I send the email that says what the schedule is for the next meeting. How does the commission feel about including that in each of the commission's minutes? My proposal is to do so, so that we're completely open to the public about what's going on. Okay, so there was one that I sent 3 weeks ago. That Stu, if you can include that in the minutes for this meeting. And then my hope is I normally try by the end of the week following to actually review the video and get all the details right and modify the look ahead so that I can then send out the schedule for the next meeting. So that's my intent. I want to emphasize that while I'm doing that, if you look in the existing look ahead, I'm not trying to crack the whip on top of whoever is the lead for any initiative. I think that's beyond what my duties as chair are. And so I'm entirely leaving it up to the initiative leads to get back to me for the when they think they'll be ready to bring something to the commission. I'd like to take Gary's example. You'll see several entries in the existing look ahead that are related. They're obviously going to be modified now because of the change that we just discussed about the TSP. But it laid out a sequence of activities over a number of meetings. And so I'd like to encourage emulating that sort of thing because it really helps the chair a lot to know what's going, how to allocate time, because commission time is so valuable to us. And so please, if you all can do that, that would be much appreciated. Now, what I'd like to do is to talk about preparing for a council study session whenever it may occur. And just to make it concrete, during this discussion between the mayor and our council liaison and the city manager, the current thing that's up in the air is no sooner than January. Hopefully in January would be the target we should be aiming for. And if so the rest of what I'm laying out here presumes that we're aiming for January, even if it gets pushed, then it does. But I don't want for us to miss an opportunity in January because we're not ready. So the mayor has communicated to me that she would like to see 3 deliverables. She suggested that she would be interested in a solar plant and EV charging, including the fleet charging. There was more detail in that, but that's my rough summary, which she had communicated to me. And then I want to quote, she would like to see things we can do most easily with additional outside funding and quickly. So that's what I know about what the mayor's looking for. Now, in the context of all this, what I have in mind is that in the next meeting in October, we will discuss a possible study session agenda. I have concepts of specific things that could be brought to council for each of the initiatives that we're working on. And I want to just throw that out there, not because I'm wedded to them, but because I would like for the conversation to become very concrete fairly quickly. So, and in the past, I have said that the initiatives, each time I list them, I'm listing them in priority order. And so I want to say that again, and I'm happy to have a discussion of why they're in that order. But if we don't need to, I'm happy to skip that discussion as well. So for formal planning, carbon notes is something that would change city processes substantially. I'm not proposing it be the lead item for the first study session because that affects staff tremendously. And I won't go into all the details, but staff is incredibly stressed, as Tanya was suggesting earlier. And so while I think we might want to start providing background on this thing, because there's a lot of education that needs to go on at the council level, I wouldn't take that as the lead item, even though formal planning to me is the first priority. The second priority is clean buildings. And for that one, I'm suggesting the home energy score. This is both because Stu has told me that there's progress already being made on it, but I also think that it is something that doesn't directly cost the city money. And there's a lot of examples nationwide and within Oregon, and it can have a major effect on what happens, again, without having to spend money. At least not enormous amounts of money, obviously. The people that do the scoring are not working for free. So that's the one I'm suggesting for clean buildings. And let me go on more quickly now. The path off fossil gas. Having the city commit to no more fossil gas infrastructure, either pipes or appliances, with a significant stake in the ground, telling both Avista and the community that the city is serious about this. And so the response in the past has been the city is already committed to doing it when it's economically feasible. And the point of doing this is to actually get it somehow embedded in city code or some significant plan that cannot be ignored. And that the city has to wade through making it economically feasible. You can't just say, oh yeah, we looked and we're done. It has to be something with teeth in it. So that's actually the one I'm proposing should be the lead item. For energy efficient transportation, I just have a question mark for reasons we've already discussed tonight. Sustainable electricity, depends on tonight. And to be honest, I need to just go think about all that a lot because that's an extremely difficult topic for how we're going to make progress on it. So my recommendation is that we pick one lead item out of the three formal planning, clean buildings, and path off fossil gas. My recommendation that it be path off fossil gas, and that we start providing background for one or two other items, because I don't think we need a whole council study session for just one thing. I think we'll end up just wasting time going over and over the same thing. So that's my concept of what we would do in October, is to have, if we don't happen to all just agree tonight, is to pick what it is that we're going to want to bring to council in October. In November, we then know what the lead item is. And so we should be prepared to have a deep discussion, whatever that is, and assign whoever is going to present the information to council. In December, we would review the presentation, and in January, we would actually have it. So that's roughly what I have in mind. And I want to open the floor for comments. We have 10 minutes left. Gary?
Oh, I was just scratching my chin. I
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
asking to be recognized. Thank you, though.
Bob?
I like your proposal, Rick. Just on the clean buildings, and I think home energy scores makes a lot of sense unless we hear back from the USDA approving the loan, in which case that is definitely going to need a study session toot sweet to prepare the council for deliberations on approving or take the acceptance of debt.
Stu, do you have, I don't remember, what's your guess for when they might get back about that?
About which one? Sorry.
The USD loan approval.
Oh, I haven't heard anything from them. It's on my list to get back to them either this week or next, and send them a tickler. So
Okay, yeah, no, I completely agree. I should have said that up front, is that if that comes through, then that clears the deck, because we need to make that go through. Tanya?
Yeah. So when that comes through, to Bob's point, the council will have to accept the award, and that will push it onto an actual council agenda for a regular business meeting. And often when we have a decision to make at a business meeting, we are able to go into that greater depth of detail around the issue. So study sessions are typically for things that don't have an immediate decision to be made. So we may not need to think about the USDA conversation as part of this study session series. It'll sort of force its own way onto that agenda, and there'll be a significant amount of staff preparation in the packet. And I would suggest that it's in those moments, in the lead up to that is when this commission should probably set up individual meetings with different counselors to just talk them through it, make sure they understand, answer any questions ahead of time that might come up in the meeting, just to make the meeting go more smoothly, and to make sure that foundational understanding is there before the decision's put in front of them. But I don't think you need to necessarily spend study session time on the USDA loan program. This commission is going to need to be ready to move when it does come in, because there'll be a deadline for the council to accept the award.
And do we have any idea how long from being informed to acceptance, what kind of time frame we're looking at there? No idea. Wow. Okay.
Well, usually what ends up happening is that in order to even put in the request, there has to be some level of council approval. So I think it's very rare that you get to that point and the council says no. It's kind of a process that just moves through. But I think in this case, there was enough question around the program the first time it came to council that we need to deal with that when it comes back. But typically when the city receives a grant or any sort of an award like that, it's even it's on the consent agenda, because there's been so much support for it all the way through the application process. But in this case, there were enough questions that I don't think that pathway for this is going to be that smooth. So we just need to be ready when the time comes to do that individual outreach to counselors.
Okay, well, so what I get out of that is that we actually have to do the prep, not necessarily dropping everything else, but we need to just go on and do it, because if we're going to have multiple commission members speaking to multiple council members, we need to get the message unified.
Yeah, it would be a good idea to get that, whatever materials this commission would want to share with the counselors, it'd be great to get that just put together, and then it's queued up, and at whatever point the message comes in from USDA, we can go forward. I mean, I'm hopeful that the USDA is going to come through with this award, since they've asked for a full proposal. And so I think it makes sense to be prepared ahead of time.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Bob. Are you the right person to sort of start that discussion?
Sure. I mean, I supported Stu on it last time, and I'm happy to, Stu and I work well together, and I think we can put together.
Okay, great.
Happy to take it on. And Tanya was also involved, and like Tanya's always got a great clear mind on these things. I'd like to also pull her in, with being respectful of her time.
That's fine. I'm happy to help with that, putting those materials together.
Okay. Ray?
So are you thinking like an hour for this study session or something less, or
Well, study sessions, I think, have a standard time is an hour and a half.
hour and a half? Okay. It seems like a lot of time.
Yeah, that's why I was proposing to have a lead item and then further background on one or two items.
Well, that's why I think the clean buildings and path off fossil gas kind of go hand in hand. Because part of what we're considering on the clean buildings is getting something in our planning to make all electric requirement for new buildings.
Okay, well, that's different than the home energy score thing that I was proposing in some ways. Anyway, I don't think we need to solve that tonight. I'm proposing of having a fairly extensive agenda item for October where we do resolve all these
Okay.
things.
I'd suggest that for that October meeting, we try to pull whomever is the lead on those 3 topical areas, that we try to flush that out so that there's material for the commission to review and discuss, and more than just simply having an open discussion about the merits or of each. So anyway, I'd be happy to follow up on the city's removal, or not removal, but disinclination to use natural gas in future buildings and projects. I'd be happy to pull that together.
Okay. So I think you're suggesting that we come up with specific topics tonight.
No, I was actually just concurring with your recommendation, actually, but suggesting that we put materials together to fluff,
Oh, I see.
to make that discussion more meaningful for us as a commission.
Yes. Right. So to the extent that people want to bring particular items that are potentially going to be at the study session, preparing some material about what that means would be helpful. So whether it's home energy score, or carbon notes, or the city not building any more gas infrastructure, or anything else that anybody wants to think of, having a little bit of material that can go in the packet would help that discussion a lot. Did I characterize that right, Gary?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm also happy to work on the carbon score too, or the carbon note.
Okay. I am out of material. So if anybody else has anything to say, I'm not seeing anything. So Jeff, thanks again for your service.
I'll miss you guys.
Yeah,
We'll miss you.
me too. Okay, we are adjourned.
Done.
Do your rain dance tonight.
Yeah, really.